A daughter insults her rich mother, calling her too weak to treat her employees well. The mother then challenges her daughter to live for 6 months without her money. What follows is, Emily Davidson, the only daughter of a wealthy family, had lived her entire life in luxury and comfort. Raised in a mansion on the outskirts of the city, Emily was accustomed to getting what she wanted simply by asking. Her world was made up of elegant dinners, exclusive events, and trips around the world. However, beneath that shiny surface was a young woman unaware of the realities of the struggles faced by ordinary people. Sarah, her mother, was a serene and kind-hearted woman who firmly believed in kindness and respect for everyone, regardless of their social status. Despite her immense wealth, Sarah had always treated her employees with consideration, a quality that Emily, in her youthful arrogance, saw as a weakness. One day, as Emily returned from one of her usual shopping sessions, she found her mother in the main living room of the mansion. Sarah was sitting on one of the elegant leather sofas, reading a philosophy book. Emily, not bothering to hide her disdain, began to recount a conversation she had had with the chauffeur that morning. "Mom, you wouldn't believe what the chauffeur said today. He wanted the afternoon off to attend his daughter's school recital." Emily paused to let out a sarcastic laugh. "I told him his job is to drive me wherever I need to go, not to play the perfect father." Sarah looked up from her book, her expression calm but loaded with disapproval. "Emily, do you really think that a person's job defines their worth?" she asked gently, setting her book aside. Emily shrugged, clearly impatient. "It's not about worth, Mom. It's about roles. He's an employee. His place is to do his job, not to ask for personal concessions. You worry too much about them, and that makes you look weak." Sarah felt a pang of sadness upon hearing her daughter's words. She knew that Emily was blinded by her privilege, unable to see beyond the bubble she had grown up in. But that blindness, Sarah thought, was also partly her fault for not having shown her the real world. "Emily, true strength is not measured by how we control others, but by how we treat them. Perhaps it's time for you to learn that lesson on your own." Emily rolled her eyes, clearly bored with the conversation. "Mom, you always make everything sound so dramatic. I don't need your lessons to know how the world works." It was at that moment that Sarah made a decision that would change Emily's life forever. With a calmness that surprised her daughter, Sarah looked her directly in the eyes and said, "I challenge you, Emily. Live for 6 months without our fortune, without our name to back you up. I'll give you only $500. Find out for yourself what it means to survive in the real world." Emily blinked, surprised by her mother's serious tone. The idea seemed ridiculous, a game she could handle with ease. 6 months? With $500? She asked, her voice full of incredulity. "And what am I supposed to do? Live, work, find a place to stay, and learn to manage without relying on the money or status that has always surrounded you. You won't have access to your bank accounts, nor can you ask for help from the family. You'll have to face life like any other person." Emily, with her typical pride, accepted the challenge without a second thought. "Perfect. I'll do it. I'll prove to you that I can survive without all this." Sarah looked at her with a mixture of sadness and hope. She knew that Emily didn't understand what she was accepting, but she also knew that this was the only way for her daughter to learn what really mattered in life. The next day, Emily left the mansion with a small suitcase and an envelope containing $500. The sun shone over the perfectly manicured gardens as she walked toward the main gate. For the first time in her life, she felt small and vulnerable, a feeling she quickly buried under her determination to prove that she could succeed. Emily began her new life with a confidence that would soon crumble. At first, the situation seemed like an adventure. She walked through the city streets, observing the neighborhoods with a curiosity she had never felt before. However, when it came time to find a place to live, reality hit hard. The apartments in the city were much more expensive than she had anticipated. Every door she knocked on offered prices that made the $500 she had in her pocket seem like a cruel joke. Finally, she ventured to the outskirts of the city, searching in more modest neighborhoods where she hoped to find something more affordable. After hours of searching, she found a small apartment in an old, run-down building. The place was dark, with stained walls and a strong smell of dampness that permeated the air. The manager, a burly man with a surly expression, informed her that the rent was $400 a month, plus a $100 deposit. Emily swallowed, realizing that this meant spending all her money at once. There would be nothing left for food, transportation, or anything else. Feeling trapped, she pulled out the bills and handed them to the manager, who tossed her a set of keys before walking away without another word. Entering the apartment was a harsh blow for Emily. The space was small, with old furniture that had seen better days. There was a rickety bed in one corner, a small refrigerator that buzzed irregularly, and a barely functional bathroom. Her family's mansion, with its spacious rooms and comforts, now seemed like a distant world. That night, Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the room with a mixture of disbelief and sadness. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone, without the support of her wealth or her name. She felt the weight of loneliness and fear begin to build in her chest. However, her pride kept her strong. She was not going to return to the mansion and admit defeat. If her mother thought this challenge would break her, she was wrong. Emily lay down on the bed, closed her eyes, and forced herself to believe that she would find a way to move forward. The following days were a whirlwind of difficulties. Emily, who had never had to look for a job, now found herself walking the streets, entering stores and restaurants, begging for any kind of work. However, her refined manners and lack of work experience did not help her. Everywhere she went, she encountered the same response: "Sorry, we're not hiring." The physical and emotional exhaustion began to take its toll. The $100 she had left barely covered basic meals, and with each passing day without finding a job, the pressure mounted. Her designer shoes, once a symbol of her status, now seemed out of place on the dirty, worn-out sidewalks of the city. Finally, when she had almost lost hope, Emily saw a small sign in the window of a grocery store that read, "Cashier needed. Apply inside." Without thinking twice, she pushed the door open and entered. The inside of the store was modest, with shelves full of products and a worn-out wooden counter. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man with a tired expression looked at her as she approached. "Hello, I saw the sign in the window. I'm looking for a job," Emily said, trying to sound confident, even though she was terrified inside. The man, who introduced himself as Frank, evaluated her briefly before nodding. "It's not a glamorous job, but it's honest. We need someone to cover the afternoon shift. If you're willing to work hard, the job is yours." Emily nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. This was her first step toward a life she had never imagined. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but at that moment, she understood that this challenge was about more than just surviving. It was about finding a new version of herself, one that could face the real world without the protections of her former life. As she left the store with her first job, Emily realized that this was just the beginning of a transformation that, though painful, was necessary to discover who she really was and what she was capable of. The first few days after getting the job at the grocery store were an overwhelming mix of emotions for Emily. On one hand, she felt a slight relief at having found a source of income, albeit minimal. But on the other, every task she performed was a constant reminder of how far she had fallen from the life she once knew. The Emily Davidson who once lived among luxuries was now trapped in a world that was completely foreign to her and, for her, humiliating. The store was small and cozy, but Emily couldn't help comparing it to the high-end boutiques where she used to shop. The smell of fresh bread coming from the bakery area was pleasant, but it wasn't the expensive fragrance of French perfume she used to enjoy. At first, every customer who entered made her nervous. What if someone recognized her? What would her friends think if they saw her behind a counter, selling cheap products? The pressure of keeping her new job led her to seek help, and she immediately thought of her Aunt Martha, her mother's younger sister. Martha had led a much more modest life than the rest of the Davidson family, choosing to be a teacher instead of marrying a rich man or dedicating herself to philanthropy. Although Emily had always seen Martha as someone different, she was now desperate for shelter and hoped her aunt would take her in temporarily. Emily took the train to the modest suburban neighborhood where Martha lived. When she arrived, she found herself in front of a small house with a well-kept garden, very different from the ostentatious luxury she was accustomed to. As she walked toward the door, pride and desperation fought within her. She didn't want to ask for help, but she felt she had no other choice. Martha welcomed her with a warm smile, but the concern in her eyes was evident. After all, it wasn't common for Emily to visit without prior notice. "Emily, what a surprise to see you here." "Come in, dear," Martha said, stepping aside to let her in. Emily crossed the threshold, breathing in the warm, familiar air of her aunt's home. However, her confidence began to waver as soon as she sat down on the small floral sofa. "Aunt Martha, I'm going through a tough time," she began, her voice betraying the vulnerability she was trying to hide. "Mom challenged me to live for 6 months without money and, well, I'm out of everything. I only found a job in a store, but it barely covers my expenses. I thought maybe I could stay with you for a while, just until this is over." Martha listened attentively, her expression growing more serious with each word. She had expected this day to come at some point, a day when Emily would face the reality of life without the shields of money and status. "Emily, dear," Martha responded, taking her niece's hand in hers, "I understand how difficult this must be for you. But I also know that your mother set this challenge for a reason. If I take you in here, you'd be escaping the true lesson she wants you to learn. It's not because I don't want to help you, but because I know this is an opportunity for you to grow." Emily remained silent, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and desolation. She had been sure that Martha would help her, and now she realized that she was more alone than ever. The idea of returning to her small apartment without the comfort of someone to care for her filled her with a fear she could barely contain. "But Aunt, I don't know if I can do it alone. Everything is so different, so hard," Emily admitted, feeling tears threatening to spill. Martha looked at her with compassion but remained firm in her decision. "I know you can, Emily. You have a strength you haven't discovered yet. Sometimes we have to fall in order to rise stronger. I'm here for you, but I can't do this for you. You have to face it alone." Emily nodded slowly, feeling a mix of resentment and understanding. She stood up, muttering a thank you before leaving the house. The cold night air hit her face as she stepped into the garden, and for a moment, she felt like everything she knew had crumbled. She walked back to the train station with a knot in her stomach. Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but her aunt's words echoed in her mind. "You have a strength you haven't discovered yet." Perhaps there was some truth to that. Maybe, after all, she could find a way to move forward. Returning to the store the next day was one of the hardest challenges for Emily. She knew she couldn't quit, that she depended on that job to survive. But the thought of spending another day as a cashier made her feel small and insignificant. However, Frank, the store owner, greeted her with a calm smile. "Everything okay, Emily?" he asked as she put on her apron. Emily tried to force a smile. "Yes, everything's fine. Just getting used to all of this." Frank nodded in understanding, but didn't press further. He was a man of few words, but he had a way of making people around him feel seen and heard. During the first hours of work, Emily focused on simple tasks, trying to stay busy so she wouldn't think about her situation. However, the task of interacting with customers overwhelmed her. An older man was one of the first customers of the day. He bought just a few items, but when Emily tried to give him change, her hands trembled and she dropped some coins. "Don't worry, we all make mistakes," the man said with a kind smile, bending down to help her pick up the coins. The man's kindness surprised Emily. She was so used to the cold interactions of her previous life that this simple show of empathy disarmed her. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling an unexpected warmth in her chest. Throughout the day, more people passed through the checkout. Some were kind and understanding, others were in a hurry and less patient, but little by little, Emily began to see each person as an individual, not just another customer. She learned to read the expressions on their faces, to anticipate their needs, and to handle the small challenges that arose. However, each small victory at work was also accompanied by a feeling of humiliation. Every time someone looked at her with disdain or impatience, she felt a pang in her pride. Before, she had been someone important, someone people respected. Now, she was just another cashier, and that made her question who she really was. One afternoon, while Emily was trying to manage a line of impatient customers, a young woman with a small child entered the store. The child, who looked about 8 years old, was running through the aisles, full of energy. "Max, please don't run," the mother said tiredly as she placed some items on the conveyor belt. Emily watched the child, who continued to play with the items on the shelves, and felt a pang of sympathy for the mother. The woman seemed exhausted, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Looks like you have your hands full," Emily commented with a smile, trying to be kind as she scanned the items. The woman returned a faint smile. "Yes, Max is a whirlwind. I don't know where he gets so much energy." Emily felt connected to this woman in a way she couldn't explain. Although their lives were very different, there was something in the situation that felt familiar. As the woman paid, Emily noticed that she carefully counted the coins before handing them over. It was evident that she was tight on money. When the boy, Max, approached the counter with the chocolate bar in hand, the mother gave him a look that mixed love and frustration. "Max, honey, we can't afford that today. Put it back, please." Emily felt a pang in her heart as she saw the disappointment on Max's face. Without thinking twice, she took the chocolate bar and slipped it into the shopping bag. "This one's on the house," she said with a smile. The woman looked at her in surprise, her eyes filled with gratitude and embarrassment. "No, I can't accept that. I don't want you to think that." Emily shook her head. "It's just a chocolate. Consider it a small gesture. Besides, I'm sure Max will enjoy it." The woman smiled, and Emily felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction that came from buying something expensive or receiving a superficial compliment. It was a deeper, more genuine feeling, a sense of having done something that really mattered. As the weeks passed, Emily began to adapt to her new life. The job at the store, which at first she had seen as a degradation, started to become a routine part of her day. Although it wasn't easy, she began to find small satisfactions in her work. She felt a certain pride every time she managed to handle a difficult situation with a customer, or when she closed the cash register without errors. But beyond that, Emily began to notice a change in herself. The pride and arrogance that had defined her personality before her mother's challenge were disappearing, replaced by a humility she had never known. The people she would have once overlooked were now part of her daily life. Her conversations with Frank, her interactions with customers, and even the small gestures of kindness, like giving Max a chocolate bar, became the most valuable moments of her day. One day, while organizing products on the shelves, Emily paused for a moment to look around. The constant buzz of conversations, the sound of cash registers, and the smell of freshly baked bread enveloped her in a sense of tranquility she never expected to find in such a simple place. She remembered her Aunt Martha's words, "You have a strength you haven't discovered yet." For the first time, Emily understood what her aunt had meant. It wasn't about being strong in the sense of controlling others or imposing oneself through power or money. It was about facing life with honesty, learning to accept one's limitations, and finding strength in empathy and compassion. That night, back in her small apartment, Emily sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the dark street. The city was a different place for her now, full of people and lives she would have never noticed before. The wealth and status that once defined her life had faded into insignificance, replaced by a new sense of purpose. Emily understood that she could no longer be the same person she was before the challenge. She had changed, and with that change, her view of the world had also evolved. For the first time, she felt at peace with the idea that true strength came from within, from the ability to adapt, to learn, and to connect with others in a genuine way. As she prepared to sleep, Emily smiled, feeling a mix of pride and serenity she had never known before. She knew there was still much to learn and face, but she was ready. For the first time in her life, she was truly prepared for the challenge. As the weeks passed, Emily began to feel more and more comfortable in her job at the grocery store. What had initially been a constant source of humiliation became a fundamental part of her new routine. She no longer woke up with the weight of despair, but with a sense of purpose, even if it was humble. Emily soon learned that each day at the store was an opportunity to connect with people she would otherwise never have met. One of those people was Frank, the store owner. Frank was a simple man, in his 50s, with graying hair and a calm, patient manner that Emily began to appreciate. One afternoon, after a long day, as Emily was closing the cash register, Frank approached with 2 cups of hot coffee. "Fancy a coffee?" he offered with a kind smile. Emily, surprised by the gesture, accepted with a shy smile. "Thank you, Frank. I needed this," she said, taking a sip and feeling the warmth of the coffee spread through her body. Frank sat in one of the chairs in front of the cash register and watched her for a moment before speaking. "You've changed a lot since you started here, Emily. At first, I thought you wouldn't last more than a week, but I'm glad I was wrong. You've learned quickly and adapted well." Emily shrugged, feeling a mix of pride and humility. Frank's words meant more to her than she would have imagined. "It wasn't easy at first, I admit," she confessed, looking at Frank. "But I've realized there's a lot to learn from a job like this. Not just about how to run a cash register or deal with difficult customers, but about people and their lives." Frank nodded, understanding the change that was happening in Emily. He had seen many employees come through his store, but something about Emily was different. It was clear that she had come from a privileged background, but now she seemed more connected to the reality around her. "Life has a way of teaching us lessons we didn't expect to learn," Frank said with a smile. "What's important is how we respond to those lessons." Emily nodded, knowing Frank was right. As she spent more time in the store, she began to feel part of something bigger than herself. She began to genuinely care about the customers who came in every day, especially Max and his mother, Grace. Max and Grace had become an important part of Emily's daily life. Max, with his endless energy and insatiable curiosity, lit up the place every time he came in. He often approached the counter to ask Emily questions that sometimes surprised her with their depth. "Why do you work here, Emily?" Max asked one day, while waiting for his mother to finish shopping. The question caught her off guard. She remained silent for a moment, searching for an appropriate answer. "Because I'm learning a lot of important things here, Max. Things I wouldn't have learned elsewhere," she replied, with a sincerity she hadn't expected. Max looked at her with his head tilted, as if processing her answer. "Like what?" Emily smiled, admiring Max's innocence and wisdom at the same time. "Well, I'm learning how important it is to work hard, how to be patient, and how to help people. And I'm also learning that you don't need to have a lot to be happy." Max nodded with a smile, satisfied with the answer. Just then, Grace approached the counter with a small shopping bag. "Max, you're not bothering Emily, are you?" Grace asked with a tired but loving smile. "No, Mom. We were just talking," Max replied, as he approached to help his mother with the bag. Grace turned to Emily with an expression of gratitude. "Thank you for being so kind to him, Emily. This place has become one of his favorites thanks to you." Emily felt a surge of warmth in her chest. In her previous life, she was used to receiving compliments for her clothes, her style, or her social status, but she had never experienced the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had made a positive difference in someone's life. "It's a pleasure to have him here, Grace. Max is a great kid, and he always brightens my day when he comes to the store." Grace smiled, and Emily noticed that behind that smile was a weariness that went beyond the physical. There was something in Grace's gaze, a constant worry that never completely faded. "Things haven't been easy for us lately," Grace confessed quietly, as if speaking more to herself than to Emily. "But I try to stay positive for Max." Emily nodded, feeling a deep connection with Grace at that moment. She wanted to do something to help, but she knew she couldn't solve Grace's problems with a simple gesture. However, she had learned that sometimes the most important thing was to be there for others, to listen, and to offer a sincere smile. "Grace, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to tell me. I'm here to help you in any way I can," Emily offered, in a tone that showed her genuine willingness to support. Grace looked at her, surprised by the offer, but saw the sincerity in Emily's eyes and knew she was serious. "Thank you, Emily. It means a lot to me," Grace said as she took Max's hand and headed toward the door. Emily watched them leave the store, feeling a mix of emotions that were new to her. It wasn't pity she felt for Grace, but a deep empathy and a desire to do more. She realized that although she couldn't change the world overnight, every small act of kindness counted. That night, as Emily prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the changes she had experienced in the past few weeks. She had started her challenge feeling lost and alone, resentful of her mother for forcing her out of her bubble of luxury. But now, she realized that this experience had transformed her in ways she never would have imagined. She remembered Frank's words, Max's questions, and Grace's quiet strength, and she realized she was learning what it meant to be truly strong. It wasn't the strength that came from money or power, but the strength that came from facing difficulties, being vulnerable, and opening up to others. As she turned off the light and lay down in bed, Emily felt a peace she had never known before. She knew there was still much to learn, but for the first time, she was excited about what the future might hold. She had found a purpose, a reason to move forward, and that was something no amount of money could buy. Emily smiled in the darkness, feeling that she was finally beginning to understand what her mother had wanted to teach her. She was finding her true strength, and that was something no one could take away from her. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe. The day Emily finally returned to the mansion was strange, full of emotions and memories. The last 6 months had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined, and now, as she walked down the long driveway flanked by tall trees and impeccably manicured gardens, she felt that each step brought her closer to a past version of herself, a version she no longer recognized. The mansion, with its imposing stone facade and elegant windows, greeted her with the same majesty it had always had. But for Emily, everything seemed different. What was once a symbol of security and power now stood as a reminder of what she had left behind and how much she had grown since then. The life she once knew, full of luxuries and comforts, now seemed superficial compared to the experiences and lessons she had accumulated during her time away from everything she knew. Emily carried a small suitcase, much lighter than the one she had taken when she left. But her heart was full of emotions, memories, and a deep understanding of what really mattered in life. As she crossed the mansion's threshold, the fresh, perfumed air inside enveloped her, but it was no longer the comforting refuge it used to be. Now, it felt strange, almost foreign, as if she no longer belonged entirely to that world. As she walked through the vast foyer, the echo of her footsteps on the marble floor resonated in her ears, reminding her of the quietness of the mansion. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of electricity and the distant sound of leaves whispering outside. Emily paused for a moment to take a deep breath, letting the emotions settle in her chest. This place, which was once her entire world, now seemed almost unrecognizable, a stage from the past where she no longer fit. After what seemed like an eternity, Sarah, her mother, appeared at the entrance to the living room. Her face showed a soft but expectant smile, and her eyes, filled with a mix of concern and hope, fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her daughter's heart race. "Emily," Sarah said, extending her arms in a gesture that was both a welcome and an invitation to talk. Emily approached her mother, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hug her with a sincerity she hadn't felt before. She clung to Sarah for a few seconds longer than she would have in the past, letting the warmth and love of her mother comfort her in a way she had forgotten. When they finally separated, Sarah looked into her eyes, searching for signs of the woman her daughter had become. "You're back," Sarah said, with a mix of relief and curiosity in her voice. "Tell me, Emily, how did it go? What did you learn?" Emily took a moment to organize her thoughts. There were so many things she wanted to say, but at the same time, it was difficult to express everything she had experienced in just a few words. "Mom, at first, I hated all of this," she confessed, looking at her mother with a sincerity she hadn't shown before. "I felt lost, humiliated, and I didn't understand why you made me do this. But now I know you did it because you wanted me to learn something I never would have learned here." Sarah nodded silently, encouraging her to continue. Emily's voice trembled slightly, but there was a firmness in her words that Sarah hadn't heard before. "It was very difficult. I didn't know how to manage my own money, how to find a place to live, or how to survive without relying on our fortune. But over time, I began to see the value in simple things. I learned to appreciate every small achievement, to understand what it means to work hard, and to connect with people in a way I never had before. Emily paused, her eyes filling with tears as she remembered the people she had met during those months. I met incredible people, Mom. People who, although they don't have much, taught me what really matters in life. I learned that true wealth isn't in money or material things, but in the relationships we build, in the kindness we show others, and in the strength we find within ourselves. Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief as she listened to her daughter's words. She had feared that the challenge would be too much for Emily, but now she saw before her a young woman who had grown in ways she never could have imagined. "I'm so proud of you, Emily," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew this challenge would be difficult, but I also knew it was necessary. I wanted you to see the world in a different way, to understand what it really means to be strong." Emily smiled through her tears, feeling a deep connection with her mother that she had never experienced before. "I understand now, Mom, and what I want most is to move forward with what I've learned. I don't want to be the person I was before. I want to do something meaningful with my life, something that really matters." Sarah nodded, knowing that her daughter had found her way. "What do you plan to do now?" she asked gently. Emily took a moment to consider the question before answering. She had thought a lot about this during her last days away from home, and she knew that her decision would be the clearest reflection of how much she had changed. "I've decided to sell all my luxury belongings, the clothes, the accessories, everything. I want to use that money to help people who need it, like Frank, Max, and Grace. And I also want to help the employees of our house, who have always been there for us but whom I never truly valued." Sarah's face lit up with a mix of surprise and admiration. This was the change she had hoped for, the transformation she knew Emily had inside her. "That's a beautiful decision, Emily. I remember you used to criticize me for treating the employees with so much kindness. What made you change your mind?" Emily took a deep breath before answering, aware that she was about to reveal something profound. "Mom, I've been working with people who depend on their daily wages to survive. Frank taught me what it means to work hard without complaining, and Carla. She barely has enough to feed her child, but she keeps going every day. I realize that our employees are people just like them, like everyone else. They're not just employees. They have lives, families, dreams. And I never saw that. I ignored them, treated them as if they were invisible. But now I know that they, too, deserve respect, recognition, and support. I want to help them improve their lives in any way I can." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears of pride. Emily's transformation was not only evident in her words, but also in the sincerity of her voice and the determination in her gaze. "Emily, what you've learned is a lesson many people never come to understand. I'm so proud of you, not just for what you've decided to do, but for the person you've become. By giving back to those who have helped you and recognizing the value of others, you're demonstrating a strength and wisdom that go far beyond what money can buy." Emily nodded, deeply understanding her mother's words. She knew she still had much to learn, but for the first time in her life, she felt she was on the right path. "Mom, thank you for making me go through this. It wasn't easy, and at first, I didn't understand it, but now I know it was the best thing you could have done for me," Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion. Sarah hugged her again, feeling a deep peace and love in her heart. "I've always wanted the best for you, Emily, and now I know you're a strong, compassionate, and wise woman. I'm so proud of the person you've become." Mother and daughter remained embraced for a long moment, in silence, sharing an understanding and love that had never been so strong. Emily knew that the journey she had embarked on did not end with her return to the mansion, but was just beginning. She was ready to face the future with a new perspective, with the support of her mother, and with the certainty that, no matter what, she would always have the strength to move forward. When they finally parted, Emily realized that although she had returned to the mansion, she was no longer the same person who had left 6 months ago. She had discovered a new version of herself, one that was ready to face the world with a heart full of compassion and a mind open to all possibilities. The next day, Emily decided to put her plan into action. She had thought long and hard about how she could give back to the mansion's employees, those who had worked behind the scenes for years to ensure her life went smoothly. They were people who had always been there, invisible to her. But now Emily wanted to make that right. The first person she decided to talk to was Maria, the housekeeper. Maria had worked for the Davidsons since before Emily was born. She was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair tied up in a bun and a stern but kind look. She had always been efficient and professional, but Emily knew very little about her, despite her having been in her life all those years. Emily found her in the kitchen, busy preparing the day's meals. Maria, seeing her enter, gave her a cordial smile but continued with her work. "Good morning, Miss Emily," Maria said in her usual respectful tone. "How are you?" Emily felt a slight knot in her stomach, aware that what she was about to say was important. "Good morning, Maria. I'm fine, thank you. Do you have a moment to talk?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Maria, surprised by the request, set aside what she was doing and turned to Emily. "Of course, miss. What would you like to talk about?" Emily took a deep breath before starting. "Maria, I've been thinking a lot about what my life has been like here and how I've treated the people who have worked for us, especially you. I've always seen you as someone who made things work, but I never took the time to get to know you, to understand your needs, or to show you the respect you deserve." Maria watched her, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. She hadn't expected this kind of conversation from Emily. "Miss Emily, I've always been here to serve your family. I've never expected anything more than to do my job," Maria responded with her usual humility. Emily shook her head. "But that's not enough, Maria. I've realized that, over all these years, I haven't been fair to you or the others. I haven't valued enough everything you've done for us. I want to change that. I want to know more about you, about your dreams, your concerns, and I want to do what I can to help you." Maria was speechless for a moment, moved by Emily's sincerity. "Miss Emily, I don't know what to say. I've always seen in you a young woman with great potential, but I never thought I would hear something like this from you. It means a lot to me, more than you can imagine." Emily felt a pang of emotion in her chest, seeing that her words had touched Maria. "I mean it, Maria, and it's not just with you. I want to talk to all the house employees, know how they are, what they need, and find ways to improve their lives. I've been selling my luxury belongings to use that money for causes that matter. And part of that money I want to allocate to you, to make sure you have what you need to be well, both here and in your own lives." Maria nodded, tears in her eyes, unable to contain her gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Emily. I'm sure everyone will be as moved as I am to hear this. We've never expected much more than our salary, but knowing that you value us this way, it's something we'll never forget." Emily hugged her, surprised at how natural the gesture felt, despite having avoided any show of affection towards the employees in the past. "I want to do things right, Maria. I want everyone to know how much I appreciate them and for this place to be a home for everyone, not just for me." The rest of the day, Emily dedicated to talking to the other employees of the mansion. She spent time with James, the gardener, a man who had worked in the mansion's gardens for decades, and with whom Emily had never had more than superficial conversations. She listened attentively as he told her about his family, his children, and the difficulties he had faced in his life. She also spoke with Rosa, the cook, who had been preparing the family's meals since Emily could remember. For the first time, Emily was genuinely interested in learning about Rosa's life, her passion for cooking, and the sacrifices she had made to raise her children. Every conversation was a revelation for Emily. These people, whom she had taken for granted her entire life, had stories, dreams, and struggles that were as real as her own. And as she listened, she felt her heart open more and more, filling with a deep empathy and a sincere desire to do the right thing. At the end of the day, Emily gathered all the employees in the living room. She had organized a small meeting to share with them what she had decided to do. The employees, accustomed to the Davidsons' formality and distance, were visibly nervous at first, but the warmth in Emily's voice and face soon reassured them. "I want to thank you all for everything you've done for my family and me over all these years," Emily began, in a voice that conveyed a sincerity everyone could feel. "I've learned a lot in the last 6 months, and the most important thing I've learned is how valuable you all are, not just as employees, but as people. The employees looked at her with a mix of surprise and gratitude. No one expected such a speech, especially not from Emily, who had always been seen as a distant and somewhat arrogant young woman. "I've decided to sell all my luxury belongings, and I want part of that money to go to you. I want you to have everything you need to improve your lives. But more than money, I want you to know that from now on, I'm here for you. I want to get to know you better, know how you are, and do what I can to help you." There was a moment of silence, followed by a soft murmur of thanks among the employees. Maria, with tears in her eyes, was the first to speak. "Miss Emily, I don't know what to say. This means so much to all of us. We never expected anything like this. Thank you, really." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth she had never experienced before. "You don't have to thank me. I just want you to know that, to me, you are part of this family, and that I'll always be here for whatever you need." The meeting lasted a little longer, with the employees sharing their own stories and thanks. Emily listened attentively, feeling that every word strengthened the bond she was building with them. Finally, when the meeting ended, she felt relieved and satisfied, knowing that she had taken a big step towards creating a home that was not only luxurious, but also full of empathy and understanding. That night, as Emily prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened since her return. She had grown in ways she never anticipated, and she knew this was just the beginning of a new life. A life where people, not things, took center stage. The challenge her mother had imposed had been tough, but it had also been the best thing that had ever happened to her. The life she had led before those 6 months no longer seemed attractive. Now, she understood the true value of human relationships, humility, and kindness. Looking toward the future, Emily knew she had much to do, but for the first time, she was excited about what the future held. She was determined to live a life that truly mattered, not just for herself but for others as well. And as she turned off the light and lay down in bed, Emily smiled, feeling a deep and lasting peace. She knew that, no matter what, she would always have the strength to face whatever challenges came her way because she had found within herself a source of power much stronger than any material wealth. The ability to love, to understand, and to act with compassion.